Thank you very much for that introduction, and may I first extend our deep-felt gratitude and thanks to Your Beatitude and Eminence Metropolitan Shio, locum tenens of the Patriarchal Throne of Georgia, and also to Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Georgia, and to distinguished members of the government, honoured guests, esteemed experts, and representatives of the community. We're very honoured to be here today and to have this opportunity, so thank you very much. Now, if I could just have... Sorry, could I just have a... There we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, in this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the conservation project dealing with the wall paintings in the Church of the Nativity of the Virgin at Gelati. I'll be talking about the immensity of this task, the difficulty, the challenges, but also our achievements and outcomes. If I may begin first just by briefly introducing ourselves, and I know David has also very generously done that already, but Lisa and I are British wall painting conservators. We've worked on many projects around the world. Scientific value, the creativity of the paintings, how they were made, that's important as well. So they are all of these things, but also much more. They are unique, irreplaceable, and precious. And that means it's a great responsibility on all of us involved in their conservation to understand them well, to know everything there is to know about them as much as possible before we make decisions on how to treat them. That's our responsibility and how we should approach this immense task and undertaking. I need hardly remind you of the scale of the main church and its associated chapels. There's an estimated 2,500 square meters of surface area inside the Gelati complex. And nearly every part of that surface area, that 2,500 square meters, is covered with painting and historic plaster. And it's against this vast context that we also need to recognize that the problems facing the paintings are also very widespread, if not comprehensive. Alongside scale, I would say that there are two other words that sum up our problems and issues in conserving the paintings at Gelati. It's complexity and time. So scale, complexity, time. What do I mean by this? Well, let's look at the wall paintings themselves. We have several different schemes of painting spanning the 12th to the 18th centuries. There's our concept of time. This is a schematic showing different phases, different schemes from different centuries. We have schemes separated by space, some of the main spaces in the church, and by century. In other parts, we have superimposed schemes. We have painting phases, one on top of another. In the small chapel of St. Marine on the southwest side of the complex, we have up to 5 painting schemes superimposed, one on top of the other. In other parts of the church, in the 16th century, for example, we have 3 or 4 schemes side by side. So already we have a level of complexity here that we need to recognize and accommodate in the conservation program. Because each of these painting phases or schemes, they differ technically from each other in significant ways. For example, the number of plaster layers present, the composition of those plaster layers. So, for example, in this image, we see examples from two different phases of painting, and the plasters are completely different. We have a close view and a microscopic view. Some plasters have lots of aggregate components, some don't. And what this means is that each of these different technological types of painting and plaster will deteriorate in different ways. So we have multiple conditions and forms of deterioration. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as conservators? Well, it means that we cannot approach this task as a one-size-fits-all endeavour. It is a highly individualised task where we have to recognise multiple differences across all these different painting schemes. So understanding the material complexity of the paintings is a basic requirement of the conservation programme, and that work has been done in recent years and is continuing, and it's an immense task, but an important one for underpinning the conservation process. It's never been done before in the history of this church in terms of its conservation, so it's a very, very important undertaking. What about the physical history? The physical history, by this I mean the history of changes that the church and its paintings have undergone over the centuries. It's quite clear from the physical evidence of the fabric that we have a long history of deterioration and loss. The configuration of the roofs and the structure have allowed long-term repeated rainwater infiltration, which has affected the fabric in the paintings. And indeed, even the fact of renewal in the paintings over the centuries attests, is evidence of deterioration and loss. So deterioration and loss are not new features. They are not things that have happened suddenly, and we tend to focus on what happens suddenly or in our own time. And it's important to move forward constructively with this project to recognise that adverse change has always been a part of the history of the fabric. We need to accommodate that in the conservation programme. This hasn't been reflected, unfortunately, in the treatment history of the church. The modern treatment of the paintings began in the 1950s and 60s, and they have been treated in almost every decade since then. Treatments have been carried out in all parts of the interior. They have included examples of wall painting detachment, consolidation of the plasters, fixing of the paint layers, cleaning, and so on. Hardly any area has escaped that. There have been repeated interventions in the same locations, and I show here an example of a repair made in the paintings which has failed. And that's something else that is a characteristic of the previous treatment of the paintings. We have a history of treatment, worsening condition, and then retreatment. If you look in this image, at the center, there's a repair and a large loss around it. So the repair has stayed in place, but the painting is lost. We want the painting to stay there, not the repair. Why is this important to recognise? Well, understandably, people look to remedial treatment to fix our problems, to provide a quick fix. It's an understandable response to an urgent situation. But in Gelati's very long history, 900 years or more, our modern interference with the paintings, which spans only about 75 years, we've made a lot of mistakes, and we can't afford to do that again. We don't have the luxury to make any more mistakes because the existence, the survival of the paintings depends on us now. why have these treatments failed in the past? It's because we have inherent deterioration that is activated by climate conditions. And we have for the wall paintings, we have two major forms of inherent deterioration, salts and biodeterioration. What do I mean by inherent deterioration? It refers to a form of deterioration that is present in or on the paintings that is now more or less there as a permanent feature. It's part of the fabric, it's part of the environment, inseparable from them. There may be measures that we can take to control deterioration, to reduce it, but essentially it's there as an ever-present component. And again, this is something that we need to recognize in order to move forward constructively with the conservation. Salts are among the most significant causes of deterioration in the wall paintings. So what are the mechanisms of salt damage? On the right is a sort of profile of a wall painting, looking at the plaster, the paint layer, and salts coming through. Salts undergo phase changes from a liquid state to a crystalline state, and that's dependent on climate parameters of humidity and temperature. And with those phase changes, we get expansion and disruption, which is what you see here. We have lots of different salts. Some are highly soluble, some are slightly soluble, and we have almost insoluble salts. What this means is that we have salts reacting to many different climate parameters across a broad range because we have multiple salts in the paintings causing that damage. We have a similar issue with biodeterioration. This is only just beginning to be recognized, but we have different forms of biological colonization happening across all the paintings. And we see in this schematic some of the extent of the different types of biodeterioration affecting the paintings. They are also inherent. They are part of the fabric, and they are linked to the prevailing environment. And biodeterioration is affecting the paintings on a wide scale, but also on a micro scale. And I think you can see in these images the sort of microscopic level that biodeterioration is undermining the paintings. So what can we humanly do about this situation? Well, what we have to do is to collect evidence and data that help us make effective judgments and choices so that we can establish what is safe and feasible to do. And that goes to the heart, the essence of what we mean by conservation. Because what we are doing is not something that we have invented, it's not something we have made up, it's not a British way of doing things as opposed to that done by any other country. But we are following international standards and ethics and principles laid down in charters on conservation, such as the ICOMOS Charter on wall paintings issued in 2003. And I'll just give you a moment to read one of the articles from that charter. What is important? It says some very important things. Our aim is to minimize deterioration. We can't stop it. We can't solve it. We have to recognize that our monuments are finite. We avoid unnecessary remedial treatments. In other words, we do what's necessary, and that means we do as little as possible and as much as necessary, and we stabilize. That's our main aim. We are trying to prolong the life of the wall paintings. We recognize that they are finite. And we also look to environmental control as one of our major tools for helping us preserve paintings in the long term. What this is essentially saying is that we cannot put all our faith in remedial treatment alone. Now, none of this means that we don't do remedial treatment. We do, and we're doing a lot of it in Gelati in the ongoing conservation program. So, for example, on the left, we have very simple but effective removal of the salts, which is removing one of our major problems. And with monitoring and repeat treatment over time, we are gradually taking away one of our biggest problems. Treatments such as consolidation of the very fragile plasters, which exist almost everywhere in the complex. And then there's the much more difficult and intensive and demanding treatment of injection grouting. This is injecting a material behind the painting to resecure it to the walls because they are separating from the walls. This is a problem that threatens huge areas of painting inside the church. It's one of our biggest problems because if those areas collapse, we've lost a lot of painting in one go. So we are working on these areas, prioritizing them, and gradually working through these areas. Now, it's important to remember that the time-consuming task of recording the condition of the paintings informs and underpins this entire process. So, for example, the conservation team has only just finished the condition assessment of the beautiful 12th century paintings in the narthex, only to discover that very large areas of those paintings are separating from the stone fabric. So with that information, we are now stabilizing those paintings, as you see in these images. And so far this campaign, I think we've grouted about 8 square meters of painting that was separated from the wall. But what's important here is the process of study, condition recording, underpins this whole process. It's all part of the same endeavor, and we need that information first in order to move forward remedially. Now, our treatments are not new or revolutionary. They're actually quite usual for wall paintings in poor condition, as at Gelati. But what is important to stress is the way in which our treatments are selected, developed, and assessed. We are guided by a number of important criteria to maximize successful outcomes. Materials and procedures, treatment procedures, are carefully developed and evaluated before implementation, and you see testing going on here. Choices of materials and treatments are informed by principles of compatibility and stability. We want our treatment materials, we need our treatment materials to behave in a similar fashion to the original materials. And what you see here is the development of repairs, which is based on analysis of the original plasters, and that's very important. So we are now rolling out these treatments in large areas of the interior. So far we've been concentrating in the north arm, but also moving into the pendentis. This graphic documentation shows the extent of treatment, and things have moved on since this documentation was made. We're working in the narthex and in other areas. So we are now beginning to having developed these treatment procedures, to implement them on a large scale. But as I emphasized at the beginning, this is not an industrial process, but a highly specialized one. And it requires judgment and skill on the part of each and every conservator. So I'm sure you'll agree that it is immensely important that this work is done by a team of young Georgian conservators with those skills. And an essential outcome of this project is the nurturing of the next generation of Georgian conservators so that they can carry forward with the necessary skills the task of conserving this country's wonderful wall painting heritage. That's really a big aim of what we're trying to do. And I have to say, it's been a joy working with the Georgian team. They are so dedicated, hardworking, earnest, and intelligent, and they are wonderful. It's fantastic. We're very privileged to work with them. What about those situations where inherent deterioration presents problems that undermine or limit treatment efforts, or in some very, very few cases, leave us with such severe problems that it's very difficult to treat the painting? Our profession of conservation is often compared with medicine, and it's a justified one. A doctor will not or should not prescribe a medication until he or she is confident that the problem has been identified. As medical problems are difficult to diagnose, more information is often required, more expertise is required before we decide what to do. And that may mean the patient remains untreated until the proper diagnosis is made. And that's exactly the same situation we have in Gelati, and that's the way we approach our problems here. Conservation, like medicine, is an evidence-based discipline. It follows a process of acquiring information and knowledge so that we can make informed choices and then implement those choices. If we look at salts, for example, which are such a big problem for us, we cannot decide how to address this complex issue until some very specific information has been required. And that information is summarized in some of the questions I show here. Which damaging salts are present? What are their concentration? How extensive are they topographically and stratigraphically? In other words, across the surface of the paintings, but also behind the paintings. What are the sources of the salts? What are their activation mechanisms? Under which climate conditions will the salts cause most damage? These are very difficult and complex questions. Understanding the nature and movement of salts in wall paintings is a discipline in its own right. It requires expertise. And we are very, very fortunate in having in the project Professor Dr. Stephen Rickerby from Potsdam University. He's a world-class expert on salts in cultural heritage in wall paintings, and he is lending his expertise to our project to help us in the diagnosis. And here you see him with the team, undertaking theoretical teaching and also on site taking salts. His findings have far-reaching implications for the conservation program. So far, 10 different species of salts have been found in the wall paintings, and they fall into 3 main categories: magnesium carbonates, magnesium sulfates, and potassium nitrate. They include some very damaging salts which are active over a wide range of climate values. The salt sources are various. Some salts come from the stone itself, so there's our problem of inherent deterioration again. Other salts come from previous conservation treatments, and again that's a warning to us that we have to be extra careful now. Other findings are critical for us in helping to define a way forward. So, for example, Dr. Stephen Rickerby has found that we have salts only in the plaster layer and not in depth inside the stone. And that's a crucial finding because it gives us the possibility to safely remove the salts from the upper layers. We are often asked, why do we leave areas like this untreated? Are we being negligent, uncaring, unprofessional? Well, the answer to this is that we're not ignoring these problems, but just as in medicine, we need first to acquire more information. Those questions again: what salts are present, where they come from, which climate conditions activate damage, and so on. And one very important, essential step that we're doing is correlating salt activity over time with climate data. So, for example, in this area and many other areas, they're being monitored regularly and closely to see whether damaging salt activity is slowing down. And there is some evidence that this is beginning to happen in some areas. And that's important because it now gives us the opportunity to know that it's safe to carry out our remedial treatments. And the point is, we did not know that before, and it would have been dangerous to treat before. So the expert salt knowledge that's been brought into the project is informing the timing, the sequence, and the nature of our treatments. And armed with this knowledge, we can now confidently move forward from testing into reducing salts from some of the most difficult areas. And this is an example of that. The lower part has had the salts removed, the upper part has not. Specific salt knowledge also helps us in the critical treatment of injection grouting, such as in the narthex, where we've been working in the last few weeks. Salt analysis is undertaken before treatment, during treatment, and after treatment. We look at the salts that would absorb into these presses that are on the paintings. So in every step of the way, our treatment is informed by scientific knowledge. And this is how it should be. This is good conservation practice informed by good science. Biodeterioration. Again, it's a very specialized area, and as a problem for wall paintings, it's only beginning to be acknowledged. There are many factors that influence or inhibit microbiological colonization. And let me just quickly run through some of the difficult questions again. Which types of biodeterioration are present and where? What harm are they doing? Is the biodeterioration dead, dormant, or active? A very important question, because it's often difficult to know the answer to those questions. What factors promote or limit the growth of microorganisms? And there's a lot of factors that we need to consider. What is the ecological succession of the biological species? Microbiology is not static, but is always changing over time. So again, these are very complex questions, and once more, we're very fortunate in having some world-class expertise to help us in the person of Dr. Daniela Isola, who you see here again, giving theoretical teaching to the conservation team. Very important that they have that theoretical teaching, and also taking samples from the wall paintings for analysis. So, having heard and seen today what I've had to present, you'll appreciate that the conservation of the Gelati wall paintings is a delicate, complex, and long-term endeavour. And we would not have been able to do this to the standards that are required without the full support of the Patriarchy and the government of Georgia, and we're immensely grateful to that. We're especially grateful to Father Kieran and his very dedicated staff who support us in so many ways. Your support is allowing us the opportunity to inform our conservation process scientifically with a sound basis of knowledge so that we can make a positive difference. Thank you very much for your attention.